You see, my dear friends, we human beings are haunted by a peculiar ghost, the fear of something we have never actually met. We tremble before death, not because we know what it is, but because we do not. It is the ultimate stranger at the door. Yet, how strange it is to fear what we have never truly experienced. We imagine death as a great black curtain at the end of the play, the final fall of the stage lights, after which all is nothing. And that, you see, is where the trouble begins, because we have imagined nothing as if it were something dreadful, a vast vacuum into which we will be thrown alone and screaming into eternity. But nothing, my friends, is not a monster. It has no teeth. It doesn't even exist in the way we think of things existing. It is simply the other side of everything. Consider this. You have no memory of ever having been absent. You can remember being a child, being in the womb, perhaps only as a dream, but not before that. And yet, that absence did not trouble you. You were not lying somewhere in cosmic boredom waiting for life to begin. You simply were not. And then you were. Life arrived, like a wave rising from a calm sea, and here you are. And so, when the wave subsides, when the form dissolves back into the ocean, why should that be any more fearful than the time before you were born? But, of course, we are terribly attached to the idea of me. We have spent years building this intricate story, the name, the face, the memories, the opinions, the likes and dislikes, and so we cling to this mask as if the mask itself were alive. And when we hear the word death, what we really hear is the end of my story. Yet, you see, the universe has never stopped at the end of a story. When one tale finishes, another begins, and all of them are written by the same author, the author that is you and me and everything. What's curious is that modern science, for all its equations and experiments, has stumbled upon a strange possibility that perhaps there is no single ending at all. Some physicists speak of something called quantum immortality, the idea that you, as the observer, never actually find yourself in the version of the universe where you cease to be. The observation continues, always, in some form, in some world. Now, whether that is true in any literal, measurable sense doesn't matter nearly as much as what it reveals about the nature of our fear. Because what if our terror of death, this deep, ancient panic that tightens the body and clouds the mind, is built upon a misunderstanding of time itself? What if the problem isn't that life ends, but that we imagine it moving forward like a line from birth to death, when in fact it has never moved at all? What if consciousness does not travel through time, but time flows through consciousness, like wind through the branches of a tree? If that is so, then death is not the opposite of life. It is merely the other rhythm of the same breath. And in the stillness behind that breath, what I like to call the eternal now, there is no beginning, no ending, and no one to be lost. Only the great unbroken act of being, playing endlessly with form, pretending to come and go, as waves pretend to rise and fall. So before we wander into the fascinating realm of physics and philosophy, I ask you to pause just for a moment and notice something rather extraordinary. You have never left the present moment. You may remember the past or anticipate the future, but your awareness, the simple fact of knowing, has never moved from now. It never dies because it was never born. It is the open space in which everything dances. And it is precisely here, in this eternal now, that the fear of death begins to lose its grip. For how can something end when it was never separate to begin with? Now, some very clever people in white coats have recently begun to say something most extraordinary, that perhaps you never really die at all. They call it quantum immortality. And when you first hear that phrase, It sounds rather like the plot of a bad science fiction novel, but the thought behind it is quite serious. You see, in the strange world of quantum physics, nothing ever happens just one way. Every possibility, however small, however improbable, is said to unfold in its own branch of the universe. Every decision you make, to lift your hand, to blink your eyes, to speak a word, divides the cosmos into an infinity of alternate realities. In one, you lifted your hand. In another, you did not. In one, you caught the train. In another, you missed it and met the love of your life at the next station. And so, some physicists have asked, if all possibilities exist, then is there ever a branch where you, the observer, truly cease to be? They say no, because there will always be at least one universe in which your consciousness continues. You always find yourself on the side of survival, like an actor forever stepping through 1,000 different stages. You never experience the scene where the curtain actually falls. Now, that is quite an idea. But before we get too excited about becoming indestructible, we should remember that science often describes things with mathematical poetry rather than metaphysical certainty. Quantum immortality, in this sense, is not so much a literal promise as a mirror, a reflection of something the mystics have always known. For what these scientists are beginning to glimpse through the microscope, the sages have seen through meditation, that consciousness is not inside the body, and therefore it cannot die when the body perishes. Imagine you're dreaming. In that dream, you build cities, meet people, even die sometimes, and yet the dreamer, the one who sleeps and dreams, remains untouched. The dream changes, but awareness does not. The physicist calls it many worlds. The mystic calls it the play of consciousness. They are both pointing to the same mystery, that life, in its essence, is self-renewing, self-perpetuating, and utterly beyond the reach of destruction. But the difference is this: the scientist looks for evidence in space and time, while the sage looks directly into the awareness that perceives space and time. Science wants to know how consciousness persists. Awakening wants to see that it never began. You see, the difficulty is not whether there is life after death, it's whether we ever truly understood what life and death mean at all. Because what we call life is simply the movement of the present moment. And what we call death is the moment we stop insisting that it move in a straight line. The physicist describes this in terms of probability. The mystic experiences it as unity. If the many worlds theory says you survive in some version of the universe, then the awakened mind says you are the universe itself. You don't survive, you express. You don't continue, you transform. Consciousness doesn't need to cling to a single storyline because it is the storyteller behind them all. And so the idea of quantum immortality, whether true or false, serves a very useful purpose. It nudges us toward the realization that our identity has always been far too small. We have mistaken the ripple for the ocean, the bubble for the air inside it. When you let go of that narrow identification with the single thread of my life, you begin to sense the vast tapestry in which every thread is woven. Then the question, will I survive death, becomes as meaningless as asking, will the sea survive when a wave breaks? Of course it will. It never went anywhere. So perhaps, instead of trying to preserve the story, we might simply enjoy the play, knowing that the actor was never in danger of vanishing. We have a peculiar habit, my friends, of imagining life as though it were a line drawn between 2 points, one end labeled birth, the other death, and the little space in between. That's what we call me. We even measure our worth by where we think we stand along that line. Young, middle-aged, old. And when the line seems to be running out, we panic, because if the line ends, surely we end too. But the line you see, is only a convenience, a mental picture. Nature doesn't draw straight lines. Look anywhere in the natural world, in trees, rivers, clouds, galaxies. There are spirals, circles, waves, cycles, but never a straight line that leads nowhere. The line is the invention of the measuring mind, the mind that believes time is a ruler and being is a number. In truth, life is not a line at all. It is a rhythm, a pulse, a dance between two inseparable partners, appearing and disappearing, being and non-being, form and formlessness. You cannot have one without the other. It's rather like the crest and trough of a wave. You can't have a crest that doesn't fall, nor a trough that doesn't rise. They are two sides of the same motion. We are so afraid of the fall that we forget the falling is what makes rising possible. Imagine music that only went up the scale and never came down. It would cease to be music and become madness. It is the return, the rest, the silence between notes that makes the melody. Death, then, is not the end of life. It is the space that gives life its shape. Think of breathing. If you try to only inhale and never exhale, you will soon discover the absurdity of clinging to one half of the process. In and out, rise and fall, come and go. This is the pattern of everything alive. But the mind wants to freeze the movie, to grab one perfect frame and make it last forever. And that, you see, is where the illusion begins. The illusion of the line. When we stop clinging to that mental picture, we begin to see that what we call birth and death are just two faces of a single event happening all at once. The sun sets here and rises there. A star dies in one galaxy and is born as light in another. The leaf falls, and in the falling, it becomes the soil from which new life springs. Nothing goes away. It merely changes costume. The philosopher thinks of time as a procession, tick, tock, one thing after another. But the mystic sees that all moments are woven into a single, timeless fabric. Each instant contains the pattern of the whole, like a hologram, or, if you prefer a simpler picture, like the reflection of the moon in every drop of water. And so, when you ask what happens after I die, it's rather like asking what happens to the wave when it returns to the sea. The answer is, it was never separate from the sea to begin with. The shape dissolves, yes, but the water remains, utterly itself, utterly at peace. To fear death, then, is to forget the circle and cling to the line. It's like insisting the melody must never end, even though its beauty lies precisely in its ending. The line, you see, was only ever a trick of perspective, a way the infinite disguised itself as finite, so that it could experience the joy of beginning and the tenderness of ending. And when you realize that, something remarkable happens. The tension relaxes. You no longer clutch at life like a drowning man grasping at a wave. You float. You flow. You let the current carry you, because you know the river and the ocean are one and the same water. That, my friends, is when you stop counting time and begin to feel eternity. Now, I should like you to consider something both obvious and astonishing. You have absolutely no idea where you came from. Not truly. You may say, well, I was born in such and such a year, in such and such a place, but that is only when your story begins in memory, not when you begin. And yet, what were you doing before that? Where were you before you were born? Some people imagine a kind of celestial waiting room, the souls lined up, filing their paperwork, waiting to be issued a body, but no one can recall such a place. We come from nowhere, and that, you see, is our first clue, because what we call nothing is not empty. It's fertile. It is the womb of all existence. Out of that unthinkable void, worlds appear as easily as breath leaves your lungs. You did not come into this world as though dropped from outside. You came out of it as a leaf comes out of a tree, or a wave out of the sea. And what happens when the leaf falls? It does not go to some other world. It simply returns to the same earth from which it sprang. What happens when a wave subsides? It doesn't die. It was never anything but water. In the same way, consciousness, the pure awareness of being aware, is not inside your body. The body is inside consciousness. The eyes do not see the world. Awareness sees through the eyes. The brain does not produce consciousness. Consciousness produces the appearance of a brain. It's rather like a flashlight trying to find the source of its own beam. It can illuminate everything except itself. And so, when you say, "I was born," it is not quite true. It would be more accurate to say, the universe began to experience itself as me. That's what's happening right now. You are the universe peeking through a particular keyhole. For a brief moment, this infinite consciousness has taken the shape of a human. To play, to learn, to laugh, to forget, and perhaps, eventually, to remember. Now, here is where the joke turns inside out. You see, we spend our lives desperately trying to protect this fragile little I, this bubble of personality, as if it were our true self. We fear its disappearance, its failure, its death. But that I is a passing reflection in the mirror of awareness. The reflection changes, but the mirror remains. Try to imagine, if you can, what it would be like not to exist. You'll find that you can't. Every effort to picture non-existence turns into another thought, another image, another presence of awareness. That's the paradox. You cannot experience your own absence, because the one who would experience it is precisely what cannot go away. So when people ask, "What happens when I die?" I sometimes say, the same thing that happened before you were born. And they look puzzled until they realize, that wasn't so bad, was it? You didn't suffer before you arrived. You didn't feel lonely, or afraid, or bored. You simply weren't. And yet, here you are, aware again. So what makes you think the universe has forgotten how to do that? You see, there's no beginning to consciousness, because consciousness is not something that started. It's the backdrop, the eternal stage, upon which beginnings and endings perform their little play. It has no start point because it was never born. It has no edge because it contains everything. It is the stillness behind the ticking of time, the silence behind every sound, the awareness behind every thought. And that awareness, my dear friends, is what you truly are. It was never born, and therefore it can never die. Let us look a little more closely at this curious thing we call reality, because what you think of as the solid world around you is much more like a dream than you might imagine. Not a meaningless dream, oh no, but a dream so convincing that you've forgotten you were the one dreaming it. You see, when you dream at night, you don't merely watch the dream as if it were a film. You are the dream. You are all the people in it, all the streets, all the stars, and the wind that blows through the trees. You are both the hero and the villain, the lover and the stranger, the dreamer and the dreamed. And when you wake up in the morning, you don't mourn for all those dream characters who vanished at sunrise. You simply smile, because you realize they were you all along. Now, in precisely the same way, this waking world is the dream of the universe, a dream dreamt by consciousness itself. The difference is only that this dream is collective. We are all dreaming together. That's what gives it its marvelous consistency. When you and I agree that the chair is red or the sky is blue, that agreement is like a shared wavelength in the great orchestra of consciousness. But the most extraordinary thing is that consciousness has managed to dream itself so vividly, so intricately, that it now believes it is separate from the dream. It says, "Here I am, a little observer inside this body, looking out at the world that is not me." And that is the original sleight of hand, the grand illusion, the magician's trick of existence. The universe hides itself from itself so that it may be surprised. And in that surprise, in that discovery of self within otherness, it finds delight. For what joy would there be in hide and seek if the seeker already knew where the hider was? And so, my friends, we wander this world, believing we are tiny sparks of consciousness adrift in a vast, indifferent cosmos, when in truth the cosmos is dreaming us. It is not that you are in the universe is in you. Now you may say, but surely there must be a distinction between illusion and reality. Yes, there is. But it's not the distinction we think. The illusion is not the world itself. It is the belief that you are apart from it. The dream is real, but the dreamer has forgotten his own face. In awakening, which is nothing more than remembering, the dreamer recognizes himself again. And that recognition doesn't destroy the dream, it transforms it. You still see the forms and faces, the mountains and clouds, the struggles and joys, but you see them as movements of yourself, like a dancer realizing she is the dance. Now, some scientists have begun to speak in eerily similar tones. They say that reality might be a kind of simulation, a projection of information, a hologram spun out of code and probability. But this, you see, is only the language of mathematics, describing what the mystics called Maya, the play of appearances. Both are pointing to the same insight, that form is not final, that everything we touch is the shimmering surface of something boundless and awake. The physicist calls it the field, the mystic calls it Brahman, and I call it the mirror, because everything you see is a reflection of what you are. Every face, every leaf, every cloud is the universe looking back at itself. And if you gaze long enough and deeply enough into anything, the eyes of a lover, the ripples on water, even the empty sky, you'll feel it looking back. It's a peculiar sensation, at once humbling and exhilarating, to realize that all along you were never merely a person in the world. You were the world pretending to be a person. The dream and the dreamer, the mirror and the reflection, the actor and the play, all one continuous movement. And once you've seen this trick, once you've caught the magician with his hand in the hat, you can never again mistake the illusion for the truth. But rather than spoiling the performance, it deepens your appreciation of it, because now you know it's a play. You know that the one who dies in the play, the one who suffers and loves and loses, was never really in danger at all. You see through the mirror, and what you see is yourself, not the small, frightened self that clings to survival, but the great self, the luminous consciousness that dreamed the whole thing just to enjoy the reflection. Now, having seen that we are both the dreamer and the dream, it's time to look at one of the cleverest illusions of all the notion that I must go on forever. That, you see, is the final trick of the ego. It dresses itself up in spiritual clothing and says, "Ah, yes, I know I am eternal. I will live forever in some finer world." But the I that makes that claim is still the same little self that fears its own disappearance. It is like a man who, waking from a dream, says, "Quick, someone preserve the dream character I was playing." He was rather charming. But the dream character was never meant to last. Its purpose was to express a particular movement of the total mind, and when that movement is complete, it dissolves back into the whole. You see, we mistake continuity for reality. We think that what is real must persist, that it must endure in time. But that is not so. What is truly real is now. It doesn't need to endure because it never departs. It is the space in which all appearances come and go. The you who insists on surviving is like a wave demanding to be permanent, forgetting that permanence belongs only to the ocean. We've been taught from childhood to think of ourselves as something separate, a little ball of consciousness trapped inside a bag of skin, marching along the narrow bridge between cradle and grave. And so we cling to that bridge with white knuckles, terrified that it might end. Yet all the while, We are the river flowing beneath it, the endless movement that has no beginning and no destination. The fear of death, then, is really the fear of losing our story. We want the narrative to continue because we believe the narrative is us. But stories are never the storyteller. The words written in the book are not the hand that holds the pen. The ego, this bundle of memories, habits, names, and faces, is a marvelous invention, a costume consciousness puts on to play the game of being human. But every game has an ending, and that is what gives it meaning. Imagine, for a moment, a play that never finished. The actors would grow exhausted, the audience would leave, and the joy of the drama would dissolve into monotony. The ending, the curtain fall, is what gives the story its shape, its poignancy, its beauty. Life without death would be like a melody that never resolves. And yet, somewhere inside, the ego whispers, "But I want to stay. I want to keep my name, my memories, my face." Poor thing, it does not realize that what it fears to lose was never truly itself. The personal identity is a temporary ripple on the surface of consciousness. What you are is the water. So, when the ego asks, "What will happen to me when I die?" you might gently laugh and say, "The same thing that happens to a wave when it subsides, it returns to the sea. It doesn't go anywhere. It simply ceases to pretend that it was ever separate." To awaken, then, is to let go of this craving for personal continuity, to stop clutching at the storyline and allow the larger life to breathe through you. When you no longer demand that your mask must survive, something far deeper begins to smile behind it. You realize that the point was never to live forever, but to live fully, to dance so completely that when the music stops, you bow with grace, and in the stillness that follows, you hear another melody begin. For you are not the performer trapped in the act. You are the stage upon which all performances appear, the silent witness, the eternal now, endlessly becoming itself in every form. And when you see that, the question of continuity no longer matters, because you discover that you were never interrupted. You know, if you really listen, not just with your ears, but with your whole being, you'll notice that life is made entirely of rhythm. Not one single thing in this universe stands still. The heart beats and rests, the lungs fill and empty, the tides rise and fall, the planets spin and pause, and even the smallest atom trembles between vibration and stillness. Everything moves to a pulse. And if we look closely, we find that death is not the opposite of life. It is simply the pause in its music. It is the space between the notes. Without that silence, the melody could not exist. Imagine, for a moment, that you are listening to a piece of music. The notes begin to flow one after another, and you're carried away by the rhythm. But what gives the music its beauty is not only the notes themselves, but the intervals of stillness between them. Those tiny gaps are what make the sound meaningful. Remove them, and you'd have nothing but noise, a frantic, unbroken stream of tone that means nothing at all. So it is with life and death. Life is the note, death is the rest. And together, they form the song. But you see, we have been conditioned to hear only the notes. We're afraid of the silence because we think it means the end of the song. Yet the musician knows better. The silence is where the music breathes. The painter leaves blank space on the canvas because without it, there can be no form. The universe, too, must exhale. It must dissolve its shapes, its forms, its living creatures, in order to inhale again, to renew the dance. If you could look at existence not as a straight line from birth to death, but as a symphony, you would see that every death, every ending is a rest that allows the music to continue. You, as consciousness, are not one note trapped forever in a single key. You are the entire melody, endlessly expressing itself in new harmonies. The trouble, of course, is that we have mistaken the pauses for disappearance. When a loved one dies, we think they've gone somewhere else, or perhaps nowhere at all. But listen carefully, the silence that follows their leaving is not absence. It's the quiet in which their presence deepens. Just as when a bell stops ringing, the air still hums with the echo. So the essence of what they were, the consciousness that played as them, is still resonating through the great field of being. If you listen without the noise of grief and fear, you can feel it. That hush is not a void. It's alive, vibrant, waiting for the next phrase. You see, the same silence that follows death is the one that preceded birth. It is the eternal stillness that holds both. Death is not an interruption, but a return to rhythm. The music doesn't end when the notes stop. It ends when the listener stops hearing. And consciousness, being the ultimate listener, never stops. This is why the sages have always said, do not resist death. To resist it is to hold your breath forever, to cling to one note until it loses all its sweetness. But to accept it, to exhale, to let go, is to discover the deeper pattern behind the pulse. You realize that dying is simply another way of breathing. So when the body weakens and the mind grows still, do not think of it as the music fading away. Think of it as the orchestra taking a brief pause tuning, perhaps, for the next movement. And in that quiet interval, you will find not emptiness, but peace, because the silence was always there, even when the music played. You see, most of us move through life as if we were traveling through time, a tiny speck being pushed forward by some invisible current from past to future, from cradle to coffin. We imagine that the past is solid, the future uncertain, and the present merely a thin slice between them. But this, I'm afraid, is another of our marvelous misunderstandings. Time is not something we move through. It moves through us. You do not stand at one end of life, looking down a long corridor toward death. Rather, the entire corridor, the whole procession of moments, arises right here, in consciousness, now. The past, you see, is nothing more than a pattern of memory, a story told by the mind. The future is a projection, a guess, a dream, a rehearsal. And all of it, both memory and anticipation, happens in the same timeless space of awareness. So the past doesn't trail behind you like a shadow, and the future doesn't lie ahead like an undiscovered country. They both exist only as ripples within the eternal now, the one reality that never moves. It's rather like the surface of a river. The water flows, yes, but the river itself remains. The shape changes, but the essence is stillness. You cannot step into the same river twice, as Heraclitus said, because the water is always new, yet the river, in its wholeness, never goes anywhere. When you awaken to this, you begin to sense that all your striving, your rushing toward goals, your clinging to the past, your anxious counting of minutes, was based on an illusion. The idea of linear time is useful for clocks and calendars, but it's a terrible way to live, because the truth is, you never left this moment. You can't. You've been here all along, dreaming of movement. The continuum of time is something the mind creates to make sense of change. But awareness itself, the space in which change happens, is utterly unmoved. It is the silent screen upon which the film of life flickers. We become so absorbed in the movie that we forget to notice the screen. Yet without the screen, there would be no picture at all. So awakening, in its simplest sense, is waking up from the continuum. It's realizing that life is not a journey from point A to point B, but a single, infinite act of being. There's nowhere to go, because you're already there. There's nothing to become, because you already are. Even the physicists, bless them, are starting to suspect this. When they speak of entanglement across time, of particles influencing one another backward and forward in what we call history. They are describing, in mathematical language, what the mystics have laughed about for centuries, that cause and effect, before and after, birth and death, are all part of one simultaneous pattern. The universe is not marching through time. It's dancing in eternity. And when you begin to live in that understanding, something wonderful happens. The urgency drops away. You stop rushing. You no longer feel that life is slipping through your fingers because you realize that there is nowhere for it to slip to. Every moment is complete. Every breath is the beginning and the end. You might still make plans, of course. You might still tell stories and mark birthdays and count the years, but now you do it playfully, like a child drawing lines in the sand, knowing the tide will wash them away. You see, the game was never to win, but to wake up to the fact that there was never any real competition. And when that insight settles in, when you realize you were never moving through time, but time was flowing through you, then something remarkable happens. The fear of endings evaporates, because how can anything end when the stage on which it appears has no beginning, no boundary, and no duration? That stage is consciousness itself, the eternal now, and you, my friends, are it. Now, I would like you to try something very simple, not as an idea, but as an experiment in awareness. Try, if you can, to find the exact point where life ends and death begins. Where is that boundary? Can you locate it? When a person dies, we say, he has gone or she has passed. But if you watch carefully, you'll notice something peculiar. There is no moment when being itself disappears. The heart slows, the breath quiets, the senses withdraw, yes, but that awareness, which knows these changes, does not vanish with them. The witness remains like the space in a room that is unchanged when you move the furniture. You might ask, how can I know this? Well, you know it already. Think of falling asleep. You lie in bed, the body begins to relax, thoughts drift apart, and then blankness. Yet, from within that blankness, you awaken again. Something was present even in the absence of dreams. Otherwise you could not say, I slept well. Now imagine that final sleep we call death. The body dissolves, the senses fade, the mind grows silent, and yet that fundamental awareness, that luminous presence, cannot be lost because it is not something you have. It is what you are. You can no more lose it than an eye can lose seeing. We are so accustomed to thinking of life as something that begins and ends within time. But life itself is not in time. Time is in life. Death seems like an event, but it's really a change of appearance, a shift in the rhythm. Just as clouds gather and scatter, awareness takes form and releases it endlessly. You see, the secret of death is not hidden in some other world. It's hidden in this very moment. In the tiny vanishings that happen all the time, the end of a thought, the fading of a sound, the pause between breaths. In each of these little disappearances, you can glimpse the same mystery. Nothing actually goes away. It simply returns to silence, waiting to rise again. But we don't notice this because we are terrified of stillness. We keep filling the gaps with words, plans, distractions, anything to avoid the echo of emptiness. And yet, that emptiness is not frightening when you look at it closely. It is peace itself, open, infinite, and alive. So when the time comes for you to face what we call death, perhaps you will remember this. You are not falling into darkness. You are falling back into what you have always been, the quiet, shining awareness that has never gone anywhere. To see through death is not to conquer it, but to recognize that it was never your enemy. Death is the universe's way of teaching you that you cannot be lost because you were never separate to begin with. And in that seeing, something wonderful happens. The fear dissolves. What was once the end becomes simply another turning of the dance. You find yourself smiling because you realize that what you are can never die. Once you see that you cannot die in the way you once imagined, life begins to feel altogether different. The tension leaves your shoulders. The urgency, the constant anxiety to become something, to make something last, it all starts to melt away like mist in the morning sun. You realize, quite suddenly, that you have nothing to defend. Because how can you defend what cannot be lost? How can you preserve what was never separate? You see, most of our suffering, all the clutching and striving, all the exhaustion and worry, comes from this deep, invisible fear of vanishing. We build monuments and careers, we chase relationships, we gather possessions, all in the hope that something of us will endure. But when you see through the illusion of the separate self, you discover that what you were trying so hard to protect was never really in danger. And this is what the great spiritual teachers have always meant by freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you please, but the freedom from needing to control it all. When you know that life and death are not enemies, you can finally relax. You can let the universe breathe through you without resistance. It's like a dance, you see. If you try to cling to a single step, you miss the rhythm. The beauty of dancing lies in movement, in the willingness to give yourself entirely to each moment and then let it go. So it is with living. When you stop clutching at life, you find that life begins to dance you. And in that dance, fear cannot survive. Because fear always depends on tomorrow, on the belief that something might happen to me. But when the me is seen for what it truly is, a wave upon the ocean, then the future loses its teeth. There is no longer the need to control, to worry, to defend. You move easily, spontaneously, like a breeze through the trees. This doesn't mean that you become careless or cold. On the contrary, you become more alive, more sensitive, because you're no longer hiding behind anxiety. You can truly love, because love is no longer mixed with fear of loss. You can truly act, because your actions are not bound by hesitation or self-protection. You can face uncertainty and even pain, because you see that all of it, the laughter and the tears, is the universe expressing itself through you. So, living without fear is not a matter of bravery. It is simply living in truth. When you stop pretending to be something apart from the whole, the game of fear is over. You laugh because you see how seriously you used to take the play, as though the actor could be killed when the curtain falls. Once this understanding dawns, the most ordinary things begin to shine. A cup of tea, a walk in the rain, the sound of a bird, all of it feels like the first morning of the world. And you realize that it always was. You were just too busy surviving to notice it. And so, when you finally understand that life cannot be held, that it was never yours to keep, you stop clutching and start embracing. You stop waiting to live and begin living now. For now is all there is, and always has been. To live without fear, then, is to live without separation, to move freely in the play of existence, trusting its rhythm, knowing that every fall is another way of rising. And perhaps when you look at the stars some night and feel that strange, sweet ache of being, you'll remember, you are not a fragile creature looking up at the universe. You are the universe looking at itself and smiling. You see, when all is said and done, there's really nothing to achieve. The universe was never a problem to be solved. It was a play to be enjoyed. And you, my dear friend, are the actor, the stage, the audience, and the playwright all at once. From the beginning, if we can even use that word, the game was simple. The one became the many. The infinite put on masks. And through the countless faces of time and form, it began to ask the oldest question of all. Who am I? And every creature, every person, every flicker of consciousness has been an answer to that question. The birds singing in the dawn, the wave breaking on the rocks, the child laughing, the old man dying, all of it is the universe discovering itself, again and again, in endless disguises. The cosmic hide and seek, that's the whole show. You, pretending to be someone else, forgetting yourself completely, only to awaken in astonishment and say, "Ah, it was me all along." And when you see this, not as a theory, but as the simple truth, shimmering through every breath, something deep within you relaxes. The strain of being somebody, the need to prove, to control, to win, all of it dissolves. You begin to live as the universe plays, freely, spontaneously, lovingly. You laugh because you realize that death was never a thief, it was the magician's flourish, the trick that makes the show delightful. You smile at the tragedies and triumphs alike because you see that they are both necessary to make the play complete. The shadow gives meaning to the light, the silence gives shape to the song, and the end gives sweetness to the beginning. So perhaps, when the time comes for the curtain to fall, you will not clutch the seat or curse the darkness. You will simply bow gracefully, joyfully, because you understand now that the play never really ends. The stage lights dim only for a moment, and then in some other theater of being they rise again. And once more, consciousness steps out and says, "Here I am." And that, you see, is eternity, not an endless stretch of time, but the timeless act of being, the eternal now, forever rediscovering itself, forever creating and dissolving and creating again. You are that. You have always been that. The wave was never apart from the sea, the dreamer never apart from the dream. So live, my friend, and die gladly. Laugh when you can, weep when you must, but never forget, it is all yourself. The stars are your eyes, the ocean is your breath, the earth is your body, and this moment is your home. And when you know that, when you feel it in your bones and your heart, you will see that the universe was never serious. After all, it was playing, and it is still playing, and it will go on playing forever because there is no one else to stop it. And so, as the old Zen masters used to say, the way out is through the door you never left. You are home. You always were. Thank you.